Hello everybody and welcome back to Chapter 9. So in our last video we talked about taking an equation that is written in Vertex form and graphing it. And in this video we are going to talk about taking some information about a parabola and creating an equation using that information. So these directions, for example, say write the equation of the parabola whose vertex is 2, -3 and who passes through the point 0, 4. 0, 5. What we're going to start with, number one, is writing down the vertex form equation. So the vertex form equation is y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k. Now, after we have the vertex form equation, we're going to fill in the information that we know from the directions to the problem. So let's go back to the directions and make sure we know what information we have. So the first thing it tells me in the directions is that the vertex is 2, -3. Now in this equation, the letters that we use for the vertex are h and k. So I'm going to write in the letters h and k above the vertex there. The other thing that we know from the directions is that our graph passes through the point 0, 5. Now that is telling me an x and a y value that our graph goes through. So the x would be 0 and the y would be 5. Now we've got an h, a k, an x, and a y, which is almost everything we need for this equation. The only thing we're missing is the a. What we're going to do next is we're going to plug in the h, the k, the x, and the y. So in other words, we're going to plug in the vertex and the point, the ordered pair that we have, and use that new equation that we create to find a. Like that's our next step, is that we need to figure out what the value of a should be. So let's plug in our information and see how we might solve. It says from our directions that the y value that we pass through is 5 equals, we don't know a. That's what we want to find. So I'm just going to write down a, parentheses. It says from our directions that the x that we pass through is 0, so I'm going to fill that in, minus, and it says from our directions that the vertex's x coordinate is 2, x minus 2, parentheses squared, plus, and it says from our directions that the k value, the y value of the vertex, is -3. Now if you look at this equation, we have numbers for everything except for a. So we can use this now to solve. So we're going to solve this equation and figure out a. Now on the left-hand side of the equal sign, we just have a 5. I don't know what a is, so I'm just going to copy it down. When I'm solving this equation, the first thing I'm going to want to do is simplify whatever's inside the parentheses. So I'm going to simplify 0 minus 2, which gives me -2 squared. And I'm going to simplify the plus and the minus and just turn it into a -3. Next, I'm going to simplify the exponents. So the exponent turns a -2 times -2 into a 4, -3. Now normally when there's a number times a variable, we rewrite that with the number at the beginning. So I would change this to 4a minus 3. Now we're just going to solve this like a normal equation. So I would start by adding 3 on both sides of the equation, and I would get 8 equals 4a. I would divide by 4 on both sides of the equation, and I would get 2 equals a. So now I know that the a in my equation is 2. So the last step then is to actually write the equation. Now when we write our equation, we want it to look like the equations we were graphing yesterday. So let me remind you of what that looks like. So we want it to look like this. There should be a y, there should be a number on the outside of the parentheses, and then an x, and a number on the inside. There should be a squared and there should be a number at the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the information we have to create an equation like that. So we're going to start with y equals, now the a that we figured out was 2, parentheses x minus the h from our directions was 2, parentheses squared, and then the k from our directions was a minus 3. And this would be your final answer. Now, some students wonder why we don't put the x and the y in this equation when we did put the 5 and the 0, the x and the y, here. The reason we put the 5 and the 0 here and we don't put it here is that these numbers were helping us figure out our a, but they're not part of the final equation. The final equation should have an x and a y in it so that we could graph lots of points that we pass through, not just the point 0, 5. Let's take a look at another example. So in this example, number 1, we are given that we pass through the vertex at 3, -3, and the point that we pass through is 2, -4. Once again, we're going to start by writing our vertex form. So y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k. Now our h would be 3, and our k would be -3, because those are the x and y coordinates of the vertex. The other point is just an x and a y. Now we're going to plug all of that information in so that we can calculate our a. So our y would be -4 equals, we don't know our a, so I'm just going to leave that as an a, parentheses, the x is 2, minus, and the x coordinate of the vertex is 3, parentheses, squared, and then plus k. Now in this case, k is a minus, so I'm going to change that to -3. Now we're just going to solve and simplify. So I'm going to drop down the -4 equals a parentheses 2 minus 3, which is -1 squared minus 3. Then I'm going to simplify the exponent. So -4 equals -1 squared is +1. And we usually write that before our variable. So I'm going to change that to 1a. Now I'm going to solve for a. So I'm going to add 3 on both sides, and I get -1 equals 1a. Now because 1a is the same thing as a, we don't really need to divide or anything like that. You could divide by 1, but you're going to get -1 for your a. So our last step then would be to write our final equation. So y equals whatever you calculated for your a, which is -1, parentheses, x minus whatever your h was, which in this problem was a 3, parentheses, squared, and then whatever your k was, which in this problem was a -3. And that is your final answer. Now the last example we're going to do today is a little bit different, and the only reason it's a little bit different is because instead of being given the vertex and the point that we pass through, we're given a graph. So our job then is to start, our new first step is to list the vertex and another point that we pass through. Now, the vertex and the other point should both be ordered pairs, so that's good to know that there should be an x and a y coordinate. The vertex is always the turning point. So this turning point here is located at the point 1, -4. And we can choose any other point on the graph to use as our other point. Now, it could be this one, or that one, or that one, or that one. It honestly doesn't matter. So I'm going to just choose the y-intercept because that's the easiest one usually to look for. It could be literally any of these and you would get the same answer. So the y-intercept here would be 0, -3. Now once I have my point and my vertex listed, because they weren't already listed for me, I just do the rest of the problem the same way. So y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k. I'm going to fill in my x, my y, my h, and my k. So my y is -3 equals a parentheses, my x is 0, minus my h is 1, parentheses squared, and my k is a -4. Now I'm going to solve. So I'm going to have -3 equals 0 minus 1 would be -1. So a parentheses -1 squared minus 4. I'm going to simplify this. So -1 squared is +1, a minus 4. I'm going to add 4 on both sides. And I'm going to have 1 equals 1a. And again, you could divide by 1 on both sides, but 1a is the same thing as just a. So a would be 1. Now that I have my a, I'm just going to write my final equation. So y equals my a, which is a 1, parentheses, x minus my h, which is a 1, parentheses, squared, and then my k, so -4. And that's my final answer. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great afternoon, and we will definitely talk about this and practice this tomorrow.